Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. Today we are joined by Michael, our resident ephesiologist. My name is Andrew Johnson. I am the associate pastor at Neartown Church in Houston, Texas. And today we are joined by Charles Campbell, who is, as of today, the co-director, regional equipper team leader. And, well, Charles, as far as I'm concerned, that's a very long title that it's very descriptive, but maybe not clear. So, Charles, tell us a bit, not just about what you do, but more about who you are.
Sure, absolutely. I'll address the title first. So I work for Send Network, which is the church planting arm of the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so the regional equippers, we are a team of people that work alongside each of our 7 regions that NAM has divided the United States and Canada up into. And we basically just come alongside our missionary leaders that are in the field to help coach, equip, train them to all the tools that we use to help church planters plant healthy, multiplying churches. So I co-lead that team, but then I'm also a player coach and work in the South region. So I work with the states that are in the central time zone in the South. So maybe that's a little more clear, even though it's a long explanation. So,
okay. That's good. So I have questions about those things, but I'll put that on pause.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Who are you when you take your hat off? What do you do?
Absolutely. So I live in Springfield, Illinois, and I've been married to Candy for 35 years. We have 3 girls. Our oldest and her husband live in Indianapolis, and they have our 2 grandbabies. And then our middle daughter lives in Jackson, Mississippi. She's a NICU nurse, and our youngest daughter lives in Springfield, Missouri. And she and her husband, she teaches school, and her husband's a nurse as well. And then my wife and I, we have an heirloom apple orchard that we started about 5 years ago, just outside of Springfield. So that's a little side hustle we have in addition to the work I do with church planters. That's so that gives you a little bit of my background. Yeah, it's kind of fun. So
yeah, well, you guys are spread out all over the country.
Yes, the girls are. So absolutely. So yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it is being recorded, which means you can't get away from the answer that you give. But which is your favorite location to visit your daughters? Right, like they're all spread out. Which one are you not? Which daughter do you love more? I'm not saying that. I'm saying which location do you enjoy visiting when you go?
Well, I mean, that's an easy get right now because my granddaughters are located in Indianapolis.
Naptown, baby.
So Indianapolis is where we love to go because the grandbabies are there. So yeah, but I can't say Jackson is my favorite because it's just muggy. Jackson, Mississippi is just a muggy city. So I'd have to say Indy is probably our favorite location to go to, mainly because the grandbabies are there.
Look, he didn't even know because I just showed Charles my Reggie Miller themed shirt that I'm wearing.
There we go.
The Indianapolis pride is always just right under the surface.
How do you how you survive in Houston being an Indianapolis fan? How do you
very easily
forgot about that? Yeah.
Very easily.
Andrew, it just flashed back that's right. You're the Indiana guy. So
it is. Yeah,
I love that.
Well, I love that you are just so committed, not just to God's kingdom, but to your family. I mean, that's the healthiest way to be. So as you were talking about things, Charles, just for context for our listeners, I actually attended a session that Charles was down in Houston leading, trying to help us as churches develop leaders, right? Develop the people that we are going to train and then send out into ministry in our local context, right? Not just send them as church planters, but people who work normal jobs and help equip and encourage them as disciples. So this is how I got to know Charles. But for our listeners, Charles, who are not so inundated with all things SBC,
Sure.
Southern Baptist Convention. You mentioned the term NAM. You mentioned the term Send Network. And so for the unaffiliated, can you explain what those are? And then I guess maybe even explain a little bit how they're even more connected as of late.
Sure, absolutely. North American Mission Board is the home mission arm, if you will, of the Southern Baptist Convention. It used to actually be called the Home Mission Board, and then it transitioned to be called the North American Mission Board in, I think it was late 90s, early 2000s. And so has the responsibility for mission work in the United States and Canada. And in 2010, Kevin Ezell became the president. And in that moment, Kevin really began to more tightly define the scope of NAM's work with the trustees, and brought that to the convention floor to say, hey, we want to focus in on just a few things. So church planting being one of those. In the midst of that, begin to recognize that with this more, because we always had a church planting focus, but kind of began to scrape away some other things that were, I think, secondary issues that just didn't need to be on NAM's plate. And so as the church planting focus began to be more clear, more well-defined, there was this idea of what would it look like inside the convention to really gather the churches, because we have 47,000 churches, but really put a focus on the churches that have a heart for and want to be directly involved in church planting. Because we could say that every church in the convention is involved in church planting if they give to our mission offering. They do that through their money. But churches that want to be more intentionally involved by raising up leaders, supporting church plants directly, partnering with church plants directly. So that's where the Send Network got formed, and that happened back in 2015. And so right now, out of the 47,000 churches, there's about 4,400 churches that are actively involved, either through intentional giving directly to church plants, or partnering with church plants, praying for church planters, or raising up church planting leadership to go start something new. So that's really kind of the essence of the Send Network. It is that family of churches that are planting churches. The mission statement is a family of churches planting churches everywhere for everyone. But it's really that family of churches inside the convention that are very focused on church planting.
Mm-hmm. And you said that there were how many that are focusing on church?
So there are out of the 47,000, there's about 4,400 that are involved either in that very intentional funding directly of a church planter, participating with a church planter, providing for a church plant, or sending out other people from their church to be church planter or church planting team members in other parts of the country. And so because the number one issue that we've got right now, it's not a financial issue, it's not a resource issue, it's having ready leaders. And that's what brought me to Houston, and how Andrew and I got to connect, because we just don't have enough ready leaders, and not just ready leaders, but also ready team members to go with those ready leaders to start new work around the country.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be the perennial problem, doesn't it? For
it
church
does.
planting.
Yeah.
And what are the ways that you all are finding are helpful in addressing that?
Yeah. So our big focus right now is, what does it look like to help churches create intentional pathways to discover the people in their church that God may be stirring in their heart something, beyond the doors of the local church. I mean, we want to help the local church as well be healthy, but we are really focused in on what does it look like for you to have a very intentional discovery process, to begin to identify what's happening in the heart of your people, and then have some intentional developmental plans for them. And then what are the places that God has put on your heart to intentionally send your people to? And so that whole idea of discover, develop, deploy is kind of the language we use, but I think the key word in all that is intentionality. And so just last week, our new president, Vance Pittman, cast a vision for what would it look like over the course of the next 10 years if we could mobilize 11,000 churches to plant 11,000 new churches, and all of those churches reach 125 new people. And so that's 2.25 million. I think that's what that is, which is 1% of the population of North America. So what would it look like to see over the course of the next 10 years, us reaching 1% of the population of our country, which would be, it doesn't sound like much, but Michael, from being in the mission field, that's significant. If you can get at 1% of a country's population, you begin to see the potential for movement to take place. Obviously, we don't create movement, but we can be involved in the principles of multiplication. And so I think that's what Vance wants us to chase after as an organization. And that's really got me excited as one of our leaders in that, getting to be a part of that.
Okay, so then allow me to ask always the awkward question, which
Ask
is,
away.
What is Send Network then doing within this, again, brand new plan, brand new vision? But what is the idea to make sure that the 4,400 goes to 11,000, and that as they're planting new churches, they are going to tell those new churches only chase after non-Christians because there is a real problem of a lot of excitement being around church planting. And then those new expressions of churches go into areas and end up just stealing sheep from other areas. And the gospel is not really going to the not yet reached. Instead, it's going to the already reached, or more just disenfranchised with whatever local expression of church. How are we helping move things forward in terms of evangelism and grabbing hold of people who don't yet know about Jesus or love him?
Yeah. So one of the things that Vance talked to us about last week, and we've been talking about it even in our training, up until now, there's an unintended consequence oftentimes of the way we've trained and equipped our planters is to chase after your launch, go hard after getting your Sunday morning service launched. And what's the easiest way to do that, Andrew? Well, it's to find a bunch of other believers or find people that are disenfranchised, people that already have an understanding of what church is and want to be a part of that.
Convince the already convinced, or convince the not too far from convinced.
Yeah. So if I'm serving hamburgers, I'm not going to chase after a bunch of people that only eat fish and chicken. I'm going to continue to pursue those people that eat hamburgers to get them to come into my thing. And so it's a longer, harder road. And Michael, this from being on the mission field internationally, that it's a longer, harder road and takes more time to lay the groundwork, think like a missionary, and really engage your context for a season before you may even see one new believer come to Jesus. And so we are working as a team to think through, how do we do a better job of helping guys not worry as much about their Sunday morning launch as we want them to think about what's it look like to, and Vance will use this language, engage your city for a season. Just dig in, think like a missionary. Where are the places? Where are the people? Where are the pockets of lostness in your city? And how do you interact with those pockets of lostness to bring the good news of the gospel? And then as you see disciples made, and then out of that rhythm of engaging the city, making disciples, then the church is birthed. And for some guys, that may be a shorter runway because they, for whatever reason, God moves in different ways where that happens more quickly. But in other situations, it may be a long runway, and we need to be patient with that.
Well, I have to
time
tell
will
you,
tell.
Charles, I have to tell you, as a professor who teaches church planting in many places around the world, that warms my heart.
Good.
Because one of the things that I've noticed in interacting with folks around the world who desire to church plant is that the model that we've seen in the U.S. has been so focused on the launch of Sunday that
Sure.
in their minds, that's what church planting is. It's getting
Yeah.
something started on Sunday.
Yeah.
And it takes some time for us to begin to think about, gosh, really, church planting is more focused on Monday through Saturday than it is
Yeah.
on Sunday,
Sunday.
because
Yeah.
it's engaging with lostness.
Yeah, it is. It is. And we're always going to have both. I mean, we're never going to get away from uh, that unintentional and sometimes very intentional run to the Sunday morning gathering. I mean, it's in some respects, it's hardwired into our culture here in the States, especially. But I think if we can help guys and help them either through because I think part of, Andrew, I think part of the conversation, and Michael, that we need to have is helping guys plan better financially. Either they're planting from a bivocational perspective, or they're planting with just a much longer runway in mind, so that they don't face the tension of, I've got to have a Sunday morning crowd, because the Sunday morning crowd is actually what pays the bills for me personally.
Mm.
I mean, there is that very real felt need for a planter of, I'm on a 3-year funding window, or I'm on maybe a 5-year funding window. But at the end of 5 years, if I don't have a group of people that are sustaining me and helping me pay my bills financially, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I think that's a very real part of this conversation that we don't talk about very often, because nobody wants to talk about funding models and how planters survive. But I think that's part of the very real tension of why guys run very quickly to, it's not the only reason, but I think it's one of the unspoken reasons why guys run very quickly to, I've got to get a crowd because I got bills to pay. I mean, let's just. I mean, I'm talking very pragmatically here, and so I know that may not sound very spiritual, but that's part of the tension. So,
well, that's more than part of the tension. Honestly, I think that's a much bigger part of this than we all want to come to grips with, because launch large models or Sunday service centric models, and again, the same but also different. They help line the coffers a little bit more reliably, and
no, absolutely, yeah.
And then to have somebody with that focus on lostness, that, because here's the really unfortunate part too. You're talking about the ugly side. I'm just going to put it all out there, right? The person who is going to then go out and declare Christ as risen and true and the one who will change your life, then it's like first 3 steps of discipleship feels like give your life to Jesus, change your mannerisms to behave like him, but also start giving, because if you don't, I can't be. And it reverses or really swaps levels of importance on what we see in Scripture and then what we do to cover our backsides.
Well, and again, I think that's why it's super important for, I mean, because you see, I mean, Paul did his tent making, but also there was a healthy conversations that happened between the churches that sent them out, Church of Jerusalem sending the offering, and so there has to be that healthy, if we're going to send these missionaries out, we do have to not leave them high and dry, and so I think that's why, it's like for our international missionaries that we send from Southern Baptist Convention, they don't have as much of that tension because they're full-time employees. They have a full-time salary that lets them slow roll, if you will, the work that they're going to do and not have to race towards a Sunday morning gathering if that's what the culture, they're able to plant more culturally appropriate, maybe, because they can have a longer time frame. Because, like I said, they're a full-time employee of our mission agency, whereas our church planters are more like the indigenous planters that they're raising up on the mission field, and so those guys have got to figure out whether it's a side hustle or being bivocational, or this new word that we use, co-vocational, or having done a really, really good job in developing partners to give them the margin to do the work that they need to do to engage their city and make disciples first.
Yeah, Charles, you mentioned just a moment ago that finances weren't a problem. And I agree with that. I mean, I think finances are the least of our problems. There's enough wealth in the evangelical church in the United States to do church planting and to do it well. But how do we motivate that type of giving? And is a part of that motivation coming to grips with the reality that we're confronting in North America?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's one of the reasons where we're having these conversations with our, so you've got 4,400 churches that are actively involved, which means you've got 43,000 churches that are not actively involved. Beyond that, they are faithful. I don't know what all the exact percentages are, but the vast majority of those are faithfully giving to we call it the cooperative program. It's our joint missions offering that all the churches give into, that gets divided between international home missions, our seminaries, and a couple other things that we do. So we do have churches that are giving to that.
Giving specifically to church planting?
Well, they're giving to that cooperative mission offering. And so some of it, there's a portion of that that goes to the North American Mission Board, which then is used, portions of that are used for church planting. And a big portion, along with an annual offering we do that's named after one of our missionaries called Annie Armstrong. So, and all of that money is directly engaged in church planting. So those resources are there. But going back to your question, Michael, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is develop more intentional, direct connections between the local church and the missionaries on the field. So one of the advantages that we have is that we're a large organization. We have lots of missionaries. We have lots of church planters. One of the disadvantages is that because we are a large organization, it's easy for there not to be any personal connections between any of those missionaries and the local church. So one of the initiatives that we launched this past year was a website called Pray for Planters. And so here in North America and Canada, you can go to that website. You can see where all the different planters are around the country that have been endorsed and have kind of set up their profile. And if you want, you can adopt one of those guys and begin to pray for them, and they will interact with you so you can develop a personal relationship between your church and them. I think that's one of the ways that we can get churches started down that pathway, is to just simply say, hey, God, where do you want us? Where do you want us to put our time and energy? And is there somebody in that location? And how can we develop a personal relationship with them and begin to pray for them? And then how can we begin to, quite honestly, go serve and help them? Whether it's short-term mission trips, whether it's something very unique and specific, like we have some churches that when they've adopted a planter, like they literally will send a couple, like my wife and I, who are empty nesters, will come in for the weekend and we'll watch the planters' kids for them so they can go have a date night, because they're brand new to a location. They don't know anybody. They don't have anybody they can trust or lean into to just do something simple like watch their kids so they can go get away. And so something as simple as that to having an ongoing, hey, we're going to come in and we're going to help you engage your city on a very regular basis as a church.
Charles,
right now,
Andrew, you're using a lot of language that we're used to hearing in an international mission context. Short-term teams, missionaries who are church planters in North America. Is that indicating that you see the North American context as increasingly a mission field?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what is it that you're seeing in North America that's giving you that indication?
Well, I'll just take my own context. Okay. So my youngest daughter graduated from her high school in 2018, and there were professing teachers, believing teachers in that public education sphere. And I think it was very friendly to families and kids that were from a faith background. Fast forward to today, and I don't think as a family, if we were starting in that same community, which is a very small suburban community of a capital city town, I don't know that we would put our girls back in that educational system because it's now become hostile to the Christian faith, and the labels that we would be labeled as a family and as our girls would get labeled would be by some folks extremist because of our views on sexuality, our views on marriage. And so just in that short 4 to 5 year span, the North American context has shifted pretty significantly in being friendly to, and now I think it's more openly hostile towards. I think our playing field is much more similar. I mean, we still very much have a Christian, people have a Christian, not worldview is not the word I'm looking for, but history. So they would be, they would be familiar with church and being invited to church and those kinds of things. So that's not completely foreign to them. Like, my friends who are pastoring a church in Italy where, they've got friends who would call themselves Catholic, but they've never stepped inside, Catholic church in all their life. And an evangelical church for them almost feels cultish. That would be the language they might use about evangelicalism. So we're not there yet in the United States, but we're running quickly towards it.
So this is maybe this is an unhelpful direction or return to where we were.
Sure.
Charles, everything that you were talking about of the desire for the long pathway to focus on discipleship of raising honest to goodness, not yet Christians to faithful followers who are seeking after others to follow Jesus in an international context. This is not because I think it's a good idea, but what's the hesitation then if we are looking towards the North American context being a mission field of treating our church planters here like full-time missionaries? What's the hesitation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we would have a category of guys that work for the North American Mission Board that function very similarly to our international missionaries. We call them church planting catalysts. And so they are full-time employees of the North American Mission Board of Send Network. Some of them are church-based, so they're bivocational, if you will. Part of their funding comes from their local church and part of their funding comes from the Send Network. And so those people are responsible for catalyzing indigenous church planters. And so I think that would be the equivalent. So we are using that strategy to do some of that. And then I think we are looking for ways to extend the runway for the indigenous guys. And so let me say this, Andrew. I think at the beginning I said we have the resources. We do have the resources for what we're currently doing. If we truly had like thousands of church planters, being raised up each and every year, then the resource challenge would be a different challenge. So
I would say we would say, hooray, the Lord has given us a new challenge.
A new challenge. Exactly. Yeah, most definitely.
And again, I'm not even suggesting that that's like the best thing, right? Like
absolutely
being fully funded, especially when we are fully funding when I say our own, I mean our North American people that we are sending into other fields and other contexts.
Yeah.
That foreign money, that sometimes is a poison pill. And so I'm not, in context where it goes, people are involved because they think I can get that money. And the same thing could happen in the States. So I'm not suggesting it's a good thing, but I'm just trying to say that money question that you brought up earlier seems like a very, very, very real question. Yeah. And if our goal is discipleship and raising up people to follow Christ with healthy churches, right, who are going to raise up healthy disciples who raise up healthy disciples, if that's the goal, and we are seeing money as a problem to get to that goal, then how can we use money to accomplish that goal without screwing up the goal? So that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I hear you. And that's not just, I mean, obviously we hit on that because it's one of the tensions. That's not the only tension that we face in the North American context. So I think the other, like we have been talking about, the other tension is that there is this expectation of, hey, our churches want to see our partner churches. Hey, how many people showed up this week? That's the lead question that gets asked. And so how do we change that conversation from how many people showed up this week to how many people did you have conversations with about Jesus this week? How many people are you walking alongside as a disciple and helping become disciple makers? And so that's not a primary conversation yet. That conversation is changing. But I think the leading question oftentimes still happens in church circles and with partners. Hey, what are you running? That kind of thing. And so that tension, again, it's there, so.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about the need for us to change the metric by which we're measuring these things.
Yeah.
What's not important is how many services are you having, or those types of things that seem to be much more Sunday centric, but rather, how many, I love that. How many spiritual conversations are you having this week?
Yeah. What's happening through the week? Both with people that don't know Jesus and the people that have come to know Jesus and that you're discipling him. And what was really cool for me to hear last week when Vance was casting vision with our team was just, he told some of the early stories of when Hope got started, when they moved out there in 2000, and just the amount of time that he and his small team that moved out there with him, because there were a couple of families that went with him, how much time they spent in involving their partner churches in just praying over that city. Quite literally he was funny because he said, because he was talking to, there were a lot of millennials in the room last week and millennials. And he's like, we use this thing called the phone book. Just talked about the fact that in the early stages of Hope Church, prayed over every single person by name in the Las Vegas phone book. And then in their target community, walked that community multiple times, praying over the people and engaging the people in that neighborhood. And then quite honestly, moving their launch date back, I think he said they reset their launch date 2 or 3 times because they just hadn't seen the people come to know Christ, that they wanted to continue to build that group of initial people that had come to Christ and were being discipled before they did a Sunday gathering. But even as he told that story, you could hear the tension of, but we got to, so, but just hearing him reinstill in us in our missionary force at Send Network of, guys, we got to get back to this place of prayerful dependence. And then out of that prayerful dependence, being bold in our conversations with people that need to know Jesus. And then out of that, see disciples and having intentional pathways to make disciples. So that's got me encouraged. So I'm looking forward. Yeah. So
there was something that you said earlier that I was both attracted to and excited by at the same time. How you mentioned these seeking after your city for a season, right? Being chasing after that. The snarky part of me wants to say, why just a season? But secondly, how are you actually helping these new churches or church plants or the people that you're pouring into, right? So I'm not making you the SBC figurehead to speak for 47,000 churches.
Absolutely.
But how are you instilling in the planters you work with that seeking after the good of your city is actually kingdom work? Don't ever lose focus of that.
Yeah. So So the church that I attend, I haven't really talked about that. The church that I currently go to, I'm one of the elders that I helped co-plant that church 15 years ago. And the young man that we have in our church planting residency right now, we're taking a very slow roll with them and just saying, hey, one of the best things you can do is just continue to figure out what does it look like to engage your city with the gospel, and giving him very specific activities to do, and ways to get into his community. In his particular situation, he's got an insider track because his wife is the librarian for the community. And so there's some very intentional things that she's doing, and through her work as a librarian, just to get
Missional
to know
librarians. That's
exactly
new,
right.
that's a new title.
Exactly
We're going
right.
to be launching soon. Missional librarians.
Hey, you'd be surprised because that person has the power to create a culture in their community that could either be favorable to the gospel or not favorable to the gospel. And so, so things like that. In the actual training that we do, so my kind of the hat that I wear for the organization is I help train our trainers who lead cohorts for our church planters. And I didn't create the material. It was actually created by a guy by the name of Mac Lake, who hired me. That's kind of was my initial kind of inroad into working for the national agency. And so Mac created this material, and as well as our assessment. In that module, in that training, we've got one of our competencies is missional engagement. And so we are putting in front of our guys, if you don't know how to think like a missionary and go after your city like a missionary, we want to give you some tools and some handles to exegete your community appropriately. So, Michael, probably some language that you're familiar with, talking about domains. What are the different domains that you can be listening in, and then where are you seeing commonalities, and what are the things that you're hearing that you could bring to the table to have a presence in that particular domain, whether it's education, whether it's the medical community, whether it's the business community, those different domains. What are the ways that you can get in and engage those different places? Because quite honestly, during COVID, for a lot of our planters, they were doing some of that, like through our public school systems. They were engaging the schools because they were partnering with the schools because they were using the schools for some of their public gathering space. And then when they lost that, they had to figure out, how do we re-engage those schools, even though we can no longer be there, And so that's been a challenge for our guys, but that's been an emphasis for us, Andrew, in the training, is to help them think through the different ways that they can do that. And some do it better than others. Some it's a bigger challenge for others. Because quite honestly, if you think about like even that whole APEST giftings, some of our guys that are planting, they're way more shepherd teacher. So they need to have a partner or a teammate that's more of that apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic kind of guy to help that shepherd teacher get out into the community, because he's good once he's got a crowd, but until he gets a crowd, that shepherd teacher sometimes really struggles to gather people. And so that's another reason why we're even encouraging guys to think through, you're not going to have all of these. So who else can come alongside you and be a partner with you as you go to engage your community?
I love that. APEST is not something that we talk about very often around here, is it, Andrew?
Okay.
That was a joke. It was a bit of a joke. I immediately, when you said APEST, I got a smile, and I was like, oh, he spoke Michael's language. Michael's re-engaged. He's in.
Well, it's such a fascinating issue because, I agree, Charles, with you. Todd Lafferty wrote a great dissertation on this in regards to what's going on internationally with APEST and the IMB. And it's almost the exact opposite is happening here, where overseas, we're really focused on developing the apostle, prophet, evangelist, those who can go out and get and start things, and very little attention on the shepherd teachers. Where here, because of the systems we have, the seminaries we have, they're focusing on the shepherd and the teacher and not so much on the apostle, prophet, and evangelist. So somehow we've got to create systems. And this is, of course, one of the things that we're passionate about, creating a system where you have all of these functioning and firing together. which is so needed for church planting, particularly in the North American context, but certainly around the world.
I know you guys have interviewed my friend Peyton Jones. So Peyton and I actually used to serve on our training team together, and that was a conversation we had on a regular basis. And just how do we create opportunities for those guys that are more apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic, or he would call them apes. How do we? Because oftentimes those guys, the local church didn't know what to do with them, and so they would go off and start a parachurch organization. A lot of our strong parachurch ministries were, especially, 50s and 60s. I mean, you look like Campus Crusade and some of those kinds of organizations. They were started by guys who, quite honestly, were probably serial church planters, but the church didn't know how to deal with them. And so they went off and did their thing in a different context because there wasn't a space for them in the church world, if you will. So I think that's the challenge for us, is how do we make sure we create a space for those guys, and then also help those guys see, especially the guys that are really strong apostolic and evangelistic and the prophetic guys to a degree, that once something gets started, you may need to be prepared to go start again, because if you stay too long in that realm and you don't have a good strong shepherd teacher with you, you may end up blowing this whole thing up. And so we've seen, in fact, got a friend who strong apostolic evangelistic, and was planted his church. And then every year they were planting more churches and more churches, but he was wearing his congregation out from this just steady stream of sending and planting, until one day he had a guy come off the international mission field and partner with him that was more shepherd teacher. And they basically flipped responsibilities. And so the shepherd teacher guy became the lead guy at the main location. And the guy that was more the apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic guy, he basically became their church planting director, but was no longer the lead shepherd teacher at the church. And the church is the main location is thriving again because they have a strong shepherd teacher to care for them. But then they also have this other guy that is just constantly, walking up to guys like you, Michael, and going, "Hey, Michael, I see something in you, and I think God may be calling you to church plant," and then developing that guy and sending him out, So it's a beautiful picture of this combination of those two men, teaming together, but the roles had to be flipped. So the apostolic evangelistic guy stepped into the more of kind of the number two role, and the shepherd teacher guy, if you will, became kind of the lead teaching visionary for the sending church. And I think that's a cool dynamic,
So who's going to go and interview them, and when does that book come out? I think everything that you just described is an incredible description of what the prayerful hope of a healthy church looks like, right? Sorry, alarm for.
Well, they've already the one guy's already written a book, and they have a podcast. So it's Clint Clifton up in Pillar Church outside of Norfolk. So he wrote the book Church Planting Thresholds, but he and his co-pastor Colby, that's their story.
That's very
cool. I think they've got some podcast. Trying to think, one of the episodes that they did before, I don't think they do their podcast anymore because Clint helps with the Send Network and the newchurches.com site. And so he's got a lot of his energy into that now. But when he and Colby were doing podcasts together, they tell that story. And so that's out, that story's out there. So
it's very cool.
You can look it up and drop it in the show notes or something, but there's some good stuff there. But Clint's book Thresholds is a book that helps planters plant healthy. And that's what he developed, out of that, I guess, his journey, if you will. So, but it was fascinating hear him talk about that story. It's fascinating to hear how he needed to really move from being the lead shepherd teacher there to being not really a number two guy because he's it's a co-elder, and they've got other elders as well. But Colby really is kind of the main voice now at the, in that home in their main location. So, but it's a good story. One example, cool. and I'm discovering others as well. But that's one that we talk a lot about in our shop.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, hey, Charles, as we're wrapping up here, one last question.
Sure.
Let's take a step back for a moment for us. Give us the kind of the 50,000-foot view of church planting in North America. What's the need here? What are we seeing on the ground? Are we making inroads? Are we falling behind? Help us out.
Is that a closing question or
a closing question?
That sounds like an episode opener.
It's a closing question intended to get Charles to come back on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, I can only talk about it from my chair. I mean, I'm one guy in a very large organization that's, I think doing some really cool stuff. There are other guys in our organization that probably have a better beat on that. If you haven't talked to Brad Briscoe yet, Brad would be, Brad's a great missiologist and friend, and probably has a better feel for kind of the breadth of that question. I guess what I'm hopeful about is that in our organization, we are talking more broadly about other models. I mean, just even last week in our meeting that Vance talked with our team, he used the word micro church, and 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know that we were actively, it was happening on the fringes. Guys like Brad were talking about it, but to hear the president of our network talk about micro churches being a possibility for us to even think about. So I'm hopeful in that, hey, we do need to look at everything. Like, everything needs to be on the table if we're going to see the gospel, the good news of Jesus, go forward into all the different pockets it needs to get to. And so we still need the hope churches like what Vance is doing there in Vegas, but we also need to be thinking about, quite honestly, the world that Brad lives in, with some of those micro church, co-vocational church. And I think we are in a position, at least from the chair that I sit in, that we're going to get to have that conversation and equip our guys to equip the indigenous planters in the field to think about those different ways of bringing the gospel to bear on people that haven't heard it yet.
Well, that seems exciting. I mean, to bring the conversation about that, the things that people are having, it almost sounds funny, rather like people are talking about micro churches in the dark. Like, are we allowed to talk about this in the context of NAM, and then have somebody say it and be like, oh my gosh, is the SBC actually going to start pursuing micro churches? Like, that's exciting.
Yeah. There's always this tension, because there's been some abuse of things like that in the past where, quite honestly, some of it comes down to just accountability and what is this guy actually doing over here? So is it really a church? Or is it a guy that met a couple of buddies at a coffee shop for coffee and he labeled it a micro church, which we didn't use that term back then. But so I think there's always that, tension of, are you being honest with what you're doing here? But I think I think we can have a good, healthy conversation about, guys that are intentionally trying to do things in different ways to reach people with the gospel, and not just check a box because they had a coffee with a couple of people, and they called it something that they shouldn't have called it. So.
Yeah, that's good. I don't think we've had Brad on the podcast. I know
we haven't.
Brad's given a lecture at one of my church planting courses on co-vocational, and it's cool. Exciting to hear that you say that there's an increasing interest in the micro church, because if Brad's correct, we're talking 50 to 60% of pastors right now in North America that are in those kinds of contexts where they have to be co-vocational, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just the average church size, I think the average SBC church, is like 70, 75 people. And so if you're pastoring a church of 70 to 75 people, that's not going to be a full-time, most likely it's not going to be a full-time deal. Your wife may be working, or you may be retired, or you doing a Covo or Bivo, so, but I think there's a more healthy respect and understanding that, hey, we're going to have to continue to figure out how to help those guys, assess those guys, equip and train those guys, so that they are planting healthy, and that they can remain in the game for a long time.
This is exciting. I feel that this conversation is certainly a healthy and hopeful outlook. I mean, certainly, again, we've looked in the mirror. Some things aren't all that rosy, and there's certainly challenges. But Charles, thank you so much for coming on and helping us kind of see what is ahead of us, both in church planting in terms of North America, the world, but through the lens of the SBC and SEND.
Well, and again, just remember, I'm one small little voice in SEND. There are a lot of other voices that have a much higher, bigger perspective, because they see a broader perspective. But from my chair, I'm hopeful. I'm encouraged. I'm excited about where we're headed. Just the fact that, even today we've got 600 church planting couples and their wives coming in. I'm looking forward to these next couple of days, just being able to encourage them and help them come back out of this 2 days of just rest and refreshment, and then also to hear Vance cast vision to them that he's cast for us about what's it look like for us to really chase after lostness in North America. And that it really encourages me.
That's great. Well, Charles, thank you so much for taking your time while you are in Miami to talk to us about all of this. Thank you for suffering for Jesus in Miami with all those church planters. Charles, if people want to get at you, reach out to you, how would they do that?
They can email me. So C Campbell, and Campbell spelled just like the multi-billion-dollar soup company. So there's a PB right in the middle of that. ccampbell@nam.net. I'm on Instagram. If you want to learn all about apples, you can check out, because that's basically all Instagram about is either my grandbabies or apples. So, but CW Camp 87 is my Instagram, and or Inside the Orchard is our orchard website. So, but those are good ways to get a hold of me.
That sounds like a very healthy social media presence. So
you can't go wrong if you're just posting pictures about apples. You know what I'm saying? So you can't get you can't get into trouble that way. So
that's fantastic. Well, Charles, thank you so much for being with Michael and I, and thank you, listener, for dedicating some of your time to joining us in this conversation. And we invite you to join us in the larger conversation. Go to ephesiology.com, check out some of the resources that we have available. You can also go to masterclasses.ephesiology.com to see what God might have for you in the next step. Or is there training? Is there education? Can you put yourself in a position to be encouraged by Christ, by brothers and sisters who are a few steps ahead of you, inviting you into God's work in this world? So thank you for joining with us. And so for Michael, for Charles, and myself, thank you for being with us on the Ephesiology Podcast.